All right. Ever feel like you're trying to like completely overhaul your entire life?
Mm-hmm.
Well, today we are diving deep, deep, deep into Atomic Habits to learn how even the tiniest changes can create a really huge impact.
Yes.
And the best part is this isn't just some motivational fluff.
Right.
We're talking real science here, folks.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this book is that the author, James Clear, he walks the walk, right?
Yeah.
He went from like this near fatal accident as like a young athlete
Oh, yeah.
to achieving some really incredible things.
Yeah.
And his story really highlights that power of building systems for success, kind of like brick by brick, habit by habit, you know?
You're not kidding. It's almost hard to believe. I mean, broken nose,
Yeah.
facial fractures, the whole 9 yards. I mean, most people would just be grateful to recover, let alone thrive afterwards.
Right.
What I find fascinating is how he frames this whole thing.
Exactly. And he doesn't frame it as like this kind of magical overnight transformation.
Right.
He dives into what he calls these lagging measures of our actions.
Okay.
Those small wins, those tiny changes that when repeated consistently completely transform your life.
All
It's
right.
like you probably don't see the results of brushing your teeth every day, right?
Right.
But you avoid those, major dental problems in the long run.
Right. Right.
It's the same principle at play.
So it's not just about like, wishing for this better life.
Yeah.
It's about putting in the work even when you don't see those immediate results. Which, I mean, that brings up a good point. How do those tiny gains actually play out in the real world?
Yeah.
What kind of impact are we even talking about here?
I mean, think about it this way. You don't just wake up one day with like $1 million in your account.
Right.
It's the result of smart financial habits, right?
Right.
Saving, investing consistently over time.
Right.
It's like all those tiny deposits adding up to something way more substantial.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
I love that.
But planting that tree, that's just step one.
Right.
You got to water it. You got to nurture it day after day to see it actually grow.
Precisely. Yeah. And speaking of consistent action, that brings us to the fascinating world of habits.
Okay.
And how they actually work. Clear introduces this like brilliant framework in the book called the habit loop, this 4-step cycle that drives any repeated behavior.
A cycle, you say. Okay, so let's break this down, this habit loop.
Okay.
What are these 4 stages?
So imagine it like this. First, you have the cue. This is like your brain's little green light, the trigger that kicks off the entire process. It could be anything, your phone buzzing, seeing a plate of cookies on the counter, even a particular feeling you associate with the habit.
So like when I get that 3 p.m. slump and automatically reach for a chocolate bar,
Yes.
that's my cue, the feeling of fatigue.
Spot on. That's exactly it. Now, once that cue happens, comes the craving. This is the desire that pushes you to actually take action. So in your case, it's that urge for a quick energy boost.
Yeah.
Or maybe just the comforting taste of chocolate.
Which then leads to the response.
Yes.
Right. That's the actual habit in action, me grabbing the chocolate
Yeah.
and taking a bite.
You got it. And lastly, we have the reward. This is the satisfying outcome, the reason why your brain decides, hey, let's do that again. So in your example, it's that temporary energy spike and the pleasurable taste of chocolate.
Wow. So it really is like this chain reaction.
It is.
Cue, craving, response, reward. Now, the question is, how can we, the listeners, use this knowledge to actually change our habits?
Yeah, that's the big question.
How do we break a bad chain or build a good one?
That's where awareness comes in.
Okay.
You can't change a habit you don't even realize you have, right?
Yeah.
Clear talks about this thing called a habits scorecard, this tool for identifying those automatic behaviors in your life. So imagine 2 columns. One for your good habits, the ones that serve you well, and another for those not so good ones.
So it's like taking inventory of your day-to-day, right?
Exactly.
Walk me through what that looks like. I want to make sure our listeners can actually start doing this.
Absolutely. So think about your mornings. What's the very first thing you do when you wake up? Do you hit snooze 5 times? Scroll through social media before getting out of bed? Or do you start your day with a healthy breakfast and maybe even a quick workout?
I'm already thinking about my own morning routine and how many of those not so good habits I'm guilty of.
Right.
But once you've identified those habits, good or bad, like what's next?
Yeah.
How do you actually start changing them?
So this is where things get really interesting. James Clear, he argues that our environment plays a much bigger role than we think.
Okay.
And he uses this example of the Japanese railway system.
That's
And it
good.
totally changed my perspective on how my surroundings impact my habits.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this Japanese railway system.
Okay. So imagine you're a train conductor, right? You are responsible for the safety of hundreds of passengers.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be incredibly precise,
Right.
right? In Japan, they use this method called point and call, where the conductors actually point at each signal and call out its status, green light, proceed.
So they are making those visual cues super obvious, leaving no room for error.
Exactly.
Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly. It sounds simple, but this practice has actually contributed to the Japanese railway system being known for its exceptional safety record.
Wow.
And Clear uses this to show the power of making good habits obvious and bad habits invisible.
Yeah.
It's like you're designing your environment to support the choices that you want to make.
So it's not just about willpower.
Right.
It's about, like, setting yourself up for success.
Exactly.
Can you give our listeners some, like, practical examples of how to apply this to their own lives?
Yeah.
What are some small tweaks we can make?
Absolutely. Start with your workspace, right?
Okay.
Is it cluttered and distracting?
Yeah.
Or is it organized in a way that inspires you to focus? Do you keep healthy snacks within reach? Think about it. If the first thing you see when you open your pantry is a bag of chips, you're way more likely to grab those than the apple that's buried in the back.
Oh, I'm so guilty of that.
Right.
Out of sight, out of mind, as they say.
Exactly.
But you're right. I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Like I'm practically setting myself up for failure before you even start the day.
And don't forget about your digital environment, too.
Oh, right.
Are you constantly bombarded by notifications and news feeds?
Oh, yeah.
Those can be just as distracting as physical clutter, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's time to turn off those non-essential notifications
Yeah.
and create some space for more focused work.
You know, you mentioning digital environment reminds me of something else I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Clear talks about this idea of resetting the room.
Yes.
What is that all about?
Oh, I love this one. It's so simple, but so effective.
Okay.
It's about taking like just a few minutes to reset your environment after you use it.
Okay.
So let's say you're done watching TV for the night, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just like leaving it on, you put the remote back, you fluff the pillows, you fold the blanket.
Yeah.
You're basically priming your environment for the next time you walk into that room.
So it's like sending a little message to your future self, making it easier to slip into those good habits without even like thinking about it.
Yes, exactly.
You love it. But we've been talking a lot about like these external cues in our surroundings. What about like the internal stuff?
Right.
Our beliefs, our values.
Yes.
How do those play into habit formation?
Yeah. That's a fantastic question. And it takes us to one of the most profound ideas in the book, which is this. Lasting behavior change is actually identity change.
Okay, now we're getting philosophical. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah.
I think our listeners could use a little more clarification here.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about shifting from focusing on what you want to do to who you want to become.
Okay.
Think back to the habit loop for a second, right?
Okay.
Instead of letting your cravings and outcomes drive that cycle, you let your values and your identity kind of lead the way.
So instead of saying, I want to eat healthier, I should be saying, I am a healthy person.
Precisely. And it's not even just about like, positive self-talk.
Yeah.
It's about aligning your actions with that desired identity. And Clear uses this really fascinating story about the Polgar sisters to illustrate this point.
Who are the Polgar sisters? This is a new one for me.
Okay. Yeah.
Fill me in.
So they were these 3 Hungarian sisters who were raised to be chess prodigies by their father.
Wow.
But they didn't just like learn chess.
Right.
They lived and breathed it.
Okay.
Imagine like their house was filled with chess books. Their days were structured around chess practice. Even their social interactions revolved around chess.
So chess wasn't just a hobby for them.
Right.
It was like part of their identity.
Exactly. And all 3 sisters, they became incredibly successful chess players.
Wow.
With one of them, Judith, becoming one of the strongest female chess players of all time.
Wow.
This story really highlights the power of social norms and how we can actually use those to our advantage.
So if you surround yourself with people who value certain habits,
Yes.
those habits become more attractive to you.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yes.
I've definitely noticed that in my own life.
Yeah.
Like, my own habits tend to kind of mirror those of my closest friends.
It's a powerful force.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, who you surround yourself with, but also the stories you tell yourself, the beliefs that you adopt.
Right.
If you believe that you're the kind of person who always gives up on their goals,
Yeah.
well, guess what?
Yeah.
You're more likely to give up.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
But how do we break out of those negative beliefs?
Yeah, that's the question.
How do we start telling ourselves more empowering stories?
It starts with awareness.
Oh,
Pay attention to the stories that you are telling yourself.
right.
And then consciously choose to rewrite them.
Right.
Focus on those small wins, because each one of those is proof that you are capable of change.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, you are not your habits, you are the architect of them.
I love that. You are the architect of your habits. I'm starting to see how all of these pieces kind of fit together now.
Yeah.
The habit loop, the environment, our own self-identity.
Exactly.
But let's get back to like practical tips for a moment.
Okay.
How do we make those good habits actually stick?
Right.
I mean, let's be real. We live in a world of instant gratification. Right?
Yes.
How do we stay motivated when the rewards of good habits often take time to show up?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Clear explains that it all comes down to this one key principle: making good habits satisfying.
Making good habits satisfying, that definitely sounds way more appealing than just like relying on willpower, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. We do live in a world of instant gratification.
We do.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah.
How do we stay motivated when those true rewards might be like months or even years away?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just understanding how our brains work, right?
Okay.
Our brains love quick rewards.
Right.
It's hardwired into us.
Yeah.
That's why it's so much harder to, stick with habits that take longer to pay off, right?
Mm.
Even if we know they're good for us in the long run.
It's like choosing between hitting that snooze button for another 15 minutes of sleep.
Right.
Or getting up early to go for a run.
Exactly.
Like my brain knows exercise is good to light us up.
Yes.
How do we figure out where our own zone of genius lies?
That's such an important point because, while we can build any habit with the right strategies, it's so much easier and more sustainable when we're passionate about what we're doing.
Yeah.
Clear talks about how our genes, they don't determine our destiny, but they can reveal our areas of opportunity.
Okay.
He introduces what he calls the Goldilocks rule,
Okay.
which basically says that, we're most engaged when we're working on challenges that are just the right amount of difficult. Okay. Not too easy, not too hard.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where we're challenged,
yes,
but not overwhelmed.
That's
right.
Exactly.
Where we can enter that flow state and really thrive.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's about identifying those activities that both excite you and play to your natural strengths.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you've always loved to write, or maybe you have a knack for solving complex problems.
Right.
The key is to experiment and explore different areas to uncover your own personal zone of genius.
It's not just about working hard. It's about working smart.
Yes.
And aligning your efforts with those natural abilities.
100%.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to hear your final takeaway for our listeners.
Okay.
What's that one nugget of wisdom you hope they'll carry with them?
If there's one thing to remember from Atomic Habits, it's that small changes compounded over time can create remarkable results.
It's so true.
Don't underestimate the power of those tiny gains and consistent effort. As James Clear himself said, success is the product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations.
So good. It's not about chasing those, quick fixes or those overnight successes.
Right.
It's about falling in love with the process of, continuous improvement.
I love that.
One small step at a time, you can design a life you love.
So well said.
And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Atomic Habits. We hope you found this conversation insightful and feel empowered to start building those atomic habits in your own life.